Two children guilty of murdering a dinner lady and her daughter. The woman and her child were stabbed in their beds by two 14-year-olds too young to be named. Also this lunchtime, failing patients and the public. The Mental Health Trust criticised after 10 killings in nearly a decade. Plus,
there is not enough evidence for me to say that he's no longer a live missing person.
Why Ben Needham's family aren't giving up hope. Inflation up to 1%, but the price rise isn't being blamed on the weaker pound. And our Rio heroes on tour. The crowds gather to celebrate our athletes for a second day.
I'm live in Trafalgar Square as the party continues.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hussain.
Good afternoon. A teenage girl has been found guilty of murdering a mother and her daughter who were stabbed and smothered as they slept. The killer is 15, but she can't be named because of her age. Neither can her boyfriend, who had already pleaded guilty to the killings. The pair are believed to be Britain's youngest ever couple to be convicted of murder, a crime they planned and carried out in April this year. Damon Green is at Nottingham Crown Court with more. Damon.
Elizabeth and Katie Edwards, a mother and a daughter, 49 and 13 years old. They were killed as they slept in their beds. A jury here at Nottingham Crown Court has heard all of the evidence, and they just took 2.5 hours to find a teenage girl guilty of their murders, crimes she carried out with her boyfriend when they were just 14 years old.
You're not videoing this, are you?
In happier times, celebrating Christmas at home with her partner, Elizabeth Edwards.
Play again.
No way!
Go on.
No.
49 years old, she died in her bed, killed by two children, aged just 14. Today a jury has found them guilty of murder. As Elizabeth lay dying, stabbed in the neck, the pair also killed her 13-year-old daughter, Katie, then calmly waited for police to arrive. When they finally broke in through a front window 36 hours later, they found their bodies upstairs and the murder weapon still in Katie's bedroom.
These two were 14 years of age when they planned, committed these callous, senseless and unprovoked attacks on Elizabeth and Katie. This case has left a number of lives in ruins. Not only Elizabeth and Katie's families, but also the two juveniles who committed these horrendous crimes.
The killers, who can't be named for legal reasons, are a boy and a girl, now both aged 15. It was the boy who brought a knife to the rear of this house in Spalding in Lincolnshire as part of a plot hatched days before. The plan, they agreed, was for the boy to go to the house armed and in secret. On 3 consecutive nights he walked along this lonely riverside path with a bag of knives. On the first 2 nights he was unable to gain access to the house. On the 3rd night he managed to climb through an open window. This was the window through which he entered, and once he'd climbed inside this house, 5 Dawson Avenue, he moved through the property, armed with one of the knives and looking for the bedrooms of his victims. It was late at night, and they hadn't been woken by his entry. When the killer found the mother and daughter in their separate rooms, they were still asleep. What happened to Katie and Liz shocked the community where they lived and where the family were active and much loved members of the church.
We started a children's choir and we had about 18 or 19 children in the choir, and she helped with that. And again, she was brilliant because very organised, very committed, never let me down, great with the children, and while I dealt with the music, she dealt with crowd control, if you know what I mean. So she became such a wonderfully committed member of St Paul's, and you know, she was here every week.
The court heard that the killers had planned to take their own lives after carrying out the murders, but when police arrived, the box of pills they'd meant to take remained untouched. They'd spent their time taking a bath, lying on a mattress, watching television, and even eating ice cream. The boy who used the knife on this mother and daughter pleaded guilty to murder at an earlier hearing. Today a jury decided the girl who plotted with him was just as guilty. Well, that 15-year-old boy pleaded guilty last week. The family of the victims left today having seen his girlfriend also found guilty of murder. She pleaded not guilty on the grounds of her mental state. Her defence had been that she suffered from adjustment disorder, a disorder triggered, they said, by stress. But the jury seemed to have rejected that theory. They agree with the prosecution that she planned and carried out cold, calculated and callous killings. And afterwards, there has been not a hint of remorse.
Damon Green in Nottingham this lunchtime, thank you. Next, after 10 killings in nearly 10 years, Sussex NHS Mental Health Trust ordered a review of its care to see what was going wrong, why it wasn't protecting their patients from killing. Today, that review has drawn some worrying conclusions. In 2 cases, investigators found the deaths could have been prevented. In others, warnings from families and patients themselves were ignored. Crucially, the Trust didn't learn from its mistakes. With the details, here's Sally Lockwood.
It was just like autopilot. I wasn't thinking, I was just doing.
Just hours after killing a complete stranger, Matthew Daly calmly described his actions to police. For years, his parents had pleaded with mental health experts to have him sectioned and warned he was a danger to the public. But last year, their greatest fear was realised when retired solicitor and great-grandfather Donald Locke was killed by their son. Matthew Daly stabbed Mr Locke 39 times after a minor collision between their cars in Findon, West Sussex. He was under the care of the Trust at the time and was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. This case prompted a review into 10 deaths over 8 years involving patients of Sussex NHS Trust, which found the Trust failed to act on threats to kill. It also failed to refer some patients with signs of psychosis to specialists, and that 2 of the 10 cases could have been prevented. One of those 2 cases was Roger Goswell, who killed his wife Susan in 2007 before taking his own life.
He cried out for help. He was a very proud man, but for him to be in hospital and said, I've got these thoughts, I'm going to murder my wife. These are the thoughts in my head, this is what I want to do. People should have sat and listened. My poor mother and her grandchildren have lost out on her. To sit here today and listen to it saying it's been predictable is atrocious.
The Trust has since apologised to the families and responded to criticism that they didn't section patients who posed such a danger.
We do deprive people of their liberty quite a lot in relation to exercising the Mental Health Act and sectioning people in our services. So in Sussex, for example, we do that in terms of the people who come into contact with our services in about 6.3% of the cases, whereas nationally it's 5.7%.
After Joe Goswell lost his parents so tragically, the same recommendations were made in subsequent cases. He now hopes lessons will finally be learned. Sally Lockwood, ITV News.
The cost of living has risen in Britain, with clothing and petrol prices increasing over the last month. The UK Consumer Price Index jumped to 1% in September. It is the highest inflation rate in almost 2 years. Our consumer editor, Chris Choi, is here. Take us through this rise and what it means.
Well, yeah, this is the big official barometer of what our pockets are going through, and it's gone up for the biggest amount since June 2014, from 0.6% to 1%. They measure everything in a big basket of goods, from chicken Kievs to women's underwear. But I think what a lot of families will find most worrying today is that the things that are seeing their biggest rises are areas of expenditure that are difficult to avoid. Let me show you the details here on our graphic. So, the biggest jump of all was in the cost of clothing and footwear, especially women's clothes. That saw a rise of 5.5%. Restaurants and hotels also put up their prices by an average of 0.7%. The cost of petrol, another crucial one, climbed by 1.2 pence per litre month on month. Diesel prices too increased even further, climbing by 1.5 pence per litre. But food itself, those prices actually dropped 0.3% according to these official figures. And as we all know, a lot of people will want to kind of blame Brexit for these price rises, but so far the officials don't see it that way. Here's Mike Presswood from the Office for National Statistics.
The current rise is very much driven by small figures of last year rather than any significant increases at the moment. And as I say, there's no evidence of the Brexit feature coming through, albeit in the producer prices we are beginning to see the exchange rate having some impact.
OK, touched on the exchange rate, the weaker pound there. Does that mean there's worse yet to come?
Well, yeah, as well as measuring what we pay, the officials look at what factories are paying, and there they saw the biggest rises for 3 years, a sign many think that lots more increases are right now marching towards us. OK, Chris Choi, thank you very much. Ministers who disagree with expanding Heathrow Airport will be allowed to voice their concerns for a limited period after a decision is made on airport expansion next week. Cabinet colleagues Boris Johnson and Justine Greening are opposed to a third runway at the UK's biggest airport. Our deputy political editor Chris Shipp is in Westminster this lunchtime. Is this the clearest indication yet of which way this decision might go?
You know, Nina, I think it is. We effectively had two decisions this morning. One was the official announcement from the government that there will finally be a decision on airport expansion next week. The second was what we can tell from that decision, and from that we think that Heathrow Airport will be the one to be given the green light to build a third runway. Why do I say that? Well, because as you mentioned there, the cabinet ministers who disagree with this, who oppose Heathrow expansion, well-known figures like Boris Johnson, the former London mayor, but also Justine Greening, the education secretary who has a constituency in Putney underneath the flight path, they are being allowed to continue to publicly oppose this decision. In other words, Downing Street are lifting what's called cabinet responsibility. Ordinarily, if you're a government minister and you don't agree with something, you have to resign. Now, given there are no ministers around that table, cabinet table, who oppose Gatwick, I think we can say from this a big decision that it's going to be a third runway at Heathrow. Controversial, there's questions over air quality and noise pollution and all the rest of it, but we should get a decision within the next 7 days.
Chris Shipp, many thanks. Iraqi forces are said to be ahead of schedule as they enter the second day of their fight to take back Mosul from the so-called Islamic State. Joined by Kurdish forces and with support from American airstrikes, they say they've secured some 20 villages on the outskirts of the city, the terror group's last foothold in Iraq. Juliet Bremner reports.
Against a backdrop of black smoke, Iraqi tanks move towards their target. They're still more than 20 miles away from the city of Mosul, where so-called Islamic State are believed to be setting fire to oil fields to slow their progress. Their immediate target are smaller towns and villages like Abbas to the southeast. It's still not clear just how much resistance they may eventually face.
Early indications are that Iraqi forces have met their objectives so far, and that they are ahead of schedule for this first day. This is going according to the Iraqi plan, but again, it's early and the enemy gets a vote here. We will see whether ISIL stands and fights. We are confident no matter what, however, that the Iraqis have the capabilities to get this job done.
The United States plans to drop 7 million leaflets over Mosul, explaining the best way civilians might try to avoid being injured. The first refugees are appearing on the roads out of the city. But there are fears that IS may try and prevent many more leaving and use them instead as human shields.
We've already seen people displaced. Our worst fear is that hundreds of thousands more could now be forced to move, and there is a shortage of resources and a scarcity of land on which to build camps to try and accommodate them.
This cockpit video shows a US airstrike targeting a vehicle believed to be carrying an explosive device. Aerial support will be critical. The Iraqi army has retaken 10 villages so far. Another 70 lie between them and Mosul, making any celebration a little premature. Juliet Bremner, ITV News.
Still to come this lunchtime, our Rio heroes on tour, this time in Trafalgar Square, as the Olympic and Paralympic stars celebrate with the crowds in the capital. Before that, Ben Needham's sister has told ITV News her family will not accept he is dead. Police searching the Greek island of Kos say they believe Ben died in an accident 25 years ago after they discovered a toy car similar to the one he was playing with when he disappeared. But Ben's sister says she still has hope and that the Needham family will keep on fighting. Nick Wallace reports.
The police search might be over, but for the family of Ben Needham, who went missing so many years ago, there's no closure and no giving up.
We was told that as a family we could all go to the farmhouse together, lay some flowers and say our final goodbyes and give up. But we can't do that. I can't do that. There is not enough evidence for me to say that he's no longer a live missing person.
Leanna says the discovery of a toy car similar to this, which Ben may have been playing with when he disappeared, means nothing.
Children and toddlers, I know from experience with my little girl, they drop things all the time. And that doesn't give me proof that if that is his car, that he died there.
Police admit their 3-week search of 2 sites near the farmhouse where Ben went missing has failed to establish any proof of what happened. But they have come to what they think is a reasonable conclusion.
It is my professional belief that Ben Needham died as a result of an accident near to the farmhouse here in Heracles, where he was last seen playing.
The alleged accident, which may have killed Ben, could have been caused by this man, digger driver Konstantinos Barkas, who died of cancer last year. A former workmate of his came forward after an appeal in May, saying Barkas could have knocked Ben over and buried his body on waste ground. But it remains just a theory, leaving Ben's family no closer to knowing the truth.
We were told to prepare for the worst, and the worst has happened in my eyes. And I think in all of our family's eyes, the worst has happened. We still don't have a conclusion to this nightmare. Whether we get one or not, we never know, but we'll continue fighting until our last breath.
Leanna will fly out to Kos to meet her mum next week, where the Needham family will decide what they can do next. South Yorkshire police say the investigation into Ben's disappearance remains open and they're committed to pursuing any new leads. Nick Wallace, ITV News.
In the United States, the Republicans put forward Donald Trump's wife to defend her husband following a succession of lewd remarks about women. Melania Trump claimed her husband's comments were simply boy talk and that he was egged on. He, meanwhile, is still insisting the election is rigged against him, as Martha Fairley now reports.
As the Trump campaign machine rolled into Wisconsin, the narrative of an unfair election took centre stage. Donald Trump claiming the elections are rigged, that there's widespread voter fraud, and accusing the media of being in cahoots with the Clinton camp.
They take a story with absolutely nothing that didn't exist, and they put it front page news because they want to poison the minds of the voters.
That hasn't stopped his wife Melania speaking to CNN.
He would never do that.
Publicly defending her husband for the first time since leaked tapes from 2005 revealed Trump making lewd comments about women.
I said to my husband that, the language is inappropriate. It's not acceptable. And I was surprised because that is not the man that I know.
I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
The broadcaster NBC yesterday fired Billy Bush, the TV host Trump was recorded talking to, and who Melania blames for leading Trump on.
They were kind of a boy talk, and he was lead on, like egg on, from the host to say dirty and bad stuff.
You feel the host, Billy Bush, was sort of egging him on?
Yes, yes.
And while polls show Trump's losing ground in some key states, his message is still resonating with Americans who view the country's political elite with suspicion. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
Finally, this lunchtime, after yesterday's Rio parade in Manchester, the party continues this lunchtime with a second celebration, this time in London's Trafalgar Square. The Olympic and Paralympic athletes have been introduced to the crowds. Later this afternoon, they'll head to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen. Richard Pallow is at the party. Richard, how's it going so far?
Oh, the atmosphere is bouncing, really. But then when you've come second in both the Olympic and the Paralympic medal table, it's kind of fair that the athletes get a second day of celebration. So here they are in Trafalgar Square in central London. Thousands have come here in their lunch break. I will say it's mainly adults and not children, because children unfortunately haven't been able to come because it's at school. Nonetheless, the athletes, when they came on stage, got the most huge reception. There are hundreds of them here, a chance for them to see the British public who watch them from home on their sofas, and for the British public to say thank you very much for what you achieved in Brazil in both August and September. Now, you talked about Manchester yesterday. Some of the athletes even couldn't attend because they told me that they are in training already, looking forward to next season and the next cycle of games. And for that reason, the rugby players, especially the men's silver medalists in the sevens, were very, very keen to come and get involved.
Yeah, it's very special for us to be a part of it. We were gutted to miss out yesterday, but we were watching on TV, and just seeing the crowds out there and seeing all the athletes enjoying themselves was awesome.
As you can see behind us, it's pretty amazing already, and we're not even kicked off yet, and I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger, and it's just amazing to be a part of it.
This is not on the scale of yesterday, not on the scale of the 100, 1,000 or so who were in Manchester, but still for the fans, the volunteers and the relatives watching, it's still a very proud moment.
Oh, it's fantastic. I've done some work with the hockey girls and volunteering for, 10, 15 years. Can't believe that they got gold. So exciting.
I think it's fabulous. They've done a wonderful thing for our country.
I think it's incredible because of London 2012. It brings it all back because we went there as well. It's just amazing that everyone comes together to support them.
And as soon as this is finished, the athletes are going that way, 800 metres to Buckingham Palace for that reception that you mentioned with the Queen.
Richard Pallow, thank you. The sun finally shining on our Rio stars. You can continue watching those celebrations on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ITV News. That's all we've got time for now. Bye-bye.